This is a Spectral Throw Deadeye on day 3 of the Affliction League, and it has about 10 million DPS, and the reason for that is because Spectral Throw is able to hit 5 to 6 times if you position yourself properly. Now these Guardians are fairly mobile, so not all hits will be able to connect. Therefore, damage against them is a bit lower than 10 million. But overall, Spectral Throw is a very hard hitting skill, has a very high base damage. 5 hits, it's at about 625% effectiveness of added damage. And it also has quite good clear, high mobility, and the new ascendancies, especially the Warden ascendancy, just improved the movement speed of this build tremendously. The way I'm scaling this build is with deck stacking. In particular, I'm using the weapons, the Claw Hand of Thought in Motion, which gives me 1 to 10 lightning damage to attacks per 10 dexterity. And I have roughly 130 to 1300 lightning damage to attacks because of this claw. Because I'm dual wielding, my whirling blades are fairly fast. This character has about 250% movement speed. With the Warden Ascendancy that gives 30% movement speed if you don't have gem socketed into your boots. My Quicksilver gives me over 60%. The rest comes from my Ascendancy and some passive 3 points. So really fast, has decent courage. I could still improve the number of projectiles with a Dying Sun, which is probably one of the upgrades I'm going to get next. Problem with this build is it's fairly susceptible against physical hits. We don't use determination. I could get the line that makes it so that physical damage is taken as an elemental damage. Like the most accessible way to do this would be with a chest craft. But other ways are get a taste of fate. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Can't really do the mods on the helmet that give physical damage taken as a fire damage or any other elemental damage if you're using the implicit. We also can't do the Dawnbreaker shield. So this build fairly weak to physical damage. You could get a Garakan's Flight, which gives you increased maximum life per dexterity. Now but we also have a lot of evasion. This build right now has about 28,000 without any flasks up. So most of the times we're fine. Like if you're not moving, if you're staying stationary for 2 to 3 seconds, you probably will die to a pack of roa or ghouls, or you might get slammed by golems and they might kill you. You also want to get a bit more chaos rest, positive chaos rest, if you want to die less often on this build. Otherwise, it's actually not really squishy, but these are some ways to make this character tankier if you want to. So the helmet basically gives us more damage, dexterity. Like there's no better alternative. This is just what you use. Claw, as previously mentioned, gives us a lot of flat damage. It is hard to beat. You could later on, if you're going for super late game, you could go for a Hunter Claw or a synthesized implicit that gives you cold damage to attacks with this weapon per 10 dexterity. But if you want to stay at a smaller budget, this is the weapon that I would recommend. Stats on this item are pretty good. Increased dexterity, increased intelligence, a little bit of crit. It is a bit worse than getting a shield with the increased dexterity implicit, but this is going to be much cheaper, and right now it's day 3. You're not really gonna get a good shield at the moment with a good implicit. So for my jewelry, I have a Shaper influenced amulet, which I bought I think for 5 Chaos Orbs. It has the line increased damage per 15 dexterity. Also has a little bit of dexterity. Nothing special. I would just get increased dex, increased damage per dexterity. Pretty straightforward. My rings I use to cap my resistances and get dexterity. I also use the non-channeling skills have minus to total mana cost, so that my Spectral Throw has a very low cost, and I'm able to use Purity and Grace combined with Enlighten without using the Charisma wheel. That saves me 3 points. Now you don't have to get resistances. on your rings, or not that much. If you go for the no socketed gems on your helmet route, which gives you 50% more elemental resistances. For my chest, this is a day 1 chest. I bought it for, I think I bought a 6-link for 50 or 60 chaos orbs. Used a couple sour essences and just settled with that. It's not great, but it helps me get more strength than intelligence for the 15% increased dexterity on my fractal thoughts. Important implicit is 1% less damage taken per 230 dexterity. This makes us a fair bit tankier. So gloves or gauntlets, pretty important. You have 2 very powerful implicits on your gloves. One is the increased damage per dexterity, and the other one is the rage on hit, which gives us a lot of attack damage, attack speed and movement speed. And you could also use Berserk to spend your rage to get a buff that improves your damage for a short period of time. And what this also does, while we have rage, we intimidate our enemies. Belt, used a bunch of sour essences. This is what I got. I use a heavy belt because I need a lot of strength and it's otherwise difficult to get. So boots, pretty straightforward. Chance, get suppression, dexterity, movement speed. For flasks, I use Tincture. Now this Tincture gives me Lightning Pen and Onslaught and Kill. You could also, instead of the Onslaught and Kill, for single target you could get the Rage on hit against unique enemies. Right now I'm just mapping, so I have a Onslaught on Kill for 10 seconds. And it's basically the entire time up while you're mapping. Damage Pen is also really nice, and it's a all damage can freeze Tincture, which helps us really die less often. We can freeze map bosses with this, which is defensively very good and offensively also very good, because to maximize your Spectral Throw damage, you want your enemies to be stationary so that all your hits from your Spectral Throw will connect, and this helps with that. And the new Wildwood Mastery makes it so that we have flasks charge sustain when we hit an enemy with a weapon, and those flasks are also have increased effect. Now right now I'm using Quicksilver and Diamond flasks adjacent to the Tincture. Once I get a Dying Sun, I'm gonna put this instead to the second flask slot and replace the Jade flask. And this should be able to sustain a Dying Sun in a Diamond flask, and it's also gonna have increased effect. So if you can find another, 20% of flask effect, you could get 3 additional projectiles from a Dying Sun, which is pretty nice. And this mod also allows us to sustain flask charges against bosses throughout the fight as long as we are hitting them. So really good mod. Obviously we have Oath of the Maji. I don't have any socketed gems in my gloves, in my boots, so I have a 30% increased movement speed and 25 increased maximum life. You could also do the 50% to all elemental resistances if you are having trouble with capping your resistances, or if you don't want to use a Purity of Elements. I use a Purity of Elements because Wrath doesn't give us that much flat damage, since we have a lot already through our Hand of Thought and Motion. Haste is not that useful. We have a lot of attack speed already, a lot of movement speed. If I have Elusive and a Quicksilver and the Onslaught from the Tincture, I'm at like over 200 movement speed. So I find Haste to be a bit overkill, and there aren't any other good auras that you can use, so I'm using a Purity of Elements. Next upgrades for this character are going to be to get a large cluster jewel with claw and dagger modifiers, with the notable Fan of Blades, which gives me one additional projectile with attacks while I'm wielding a claw or a dagger. Then I also want to get the Storm Rider boots, which has the implicit 1 to 6 added attack lightning damage per 200 accuracy rating, with the downside 25% less accuracy rating. Because we are DAG stacking, we have a lot of accuracy, like 4727 right now. If I use this boot, I'll have to use also this wheel with the mastery that gives me an additional accuracy rating per dexterity. With all this combined, the boot should give me about 20% more damage. Some other upgrades that I want to get are the increased dexterity implicit on the amulet, as well as on the belt. And I want to have plus to all attributes on the amulet. I think the highest tier is necessary, so I don't have to use these 2 points to fulfill my attribute requirements. And I also won't have to use a heavy belt, ideally. This will require all attributes on the amulet and a strength suffix on the heavy belt. That was the build update. Thank you for watching.